Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, a program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. That scintillating talk show heard throughout Logan County and perhaps in Sangamon County, a little bit of McLean County.
Don't forget DeWitt.
Perhaps DeWitt and Menard. And Mason County, where we go 60-some miles. Well, I've heard it clear up above Pontiac. Try put the mic in front of you for a change. Act like you've done this before. Viewpoint. Program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Did we say that? Okay.
Not today. You didn't.
Yes, all right. Okay. No. Yes, we did twice. Because we have a great personality, and hopefully we'll have some perspectives. Mr. Butler, you'll recall that we always try to open the program with a kudo or two. And we had some, people don't hear much about the 4-H anymore.
No.
It doesn't get a lot of ink or airtime. Having said that, it's vitally important to those youngsters who are involved in it. And we have an amazing number of youngsters, including big city youngsters, who are involved in the heart, health, head, and hands. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Not bad for a city
Good job.
boy.
Very
Not bad
good.
for a city boy.
It's probably better than I could have done. That's all right.
Well, seriously, it's a great organization, and you don't have to come off of the farmland to be a member of the organization, as I indicated. But we had 4 youngsters here in Central Illinois who were over in Champaign last week and received lifetime achievements from the 4-H organization. They're in their constituency yours, Mr. Butler. We have Molly Shemp, who lives right here in Atlanta, and Katie Lynn, who's a Lincoln girl, and Caitlin Helton, who's a Middletown girl.
Yeah, very good.
So congratulations to those folks.
Spanning Logan County there. Right?
Yeah, we did. So lifetime 4-H
That's
award.
wonderful.
So
They do a good job in Springfield, too. Every year they bring 4-H folks to Springfield and have a good lobby day to make sure that we know what's going on with 4-H. They do good programs, like you said. It's not just out in the country. They've got good programs in the city. That District 186 in Springfield gets 4-H kids involved and everything. So they do a lot of good work. They really do.
My kids were in 4-H, and we lived right in the middle of Lincoln always.
Yep.
So,
did you check that out? Listen, we're advocating protocol here somehow.
How's that?
We haven't officially introduced our guest. For goodness sakes.
Well,
I'm going to have to talk with you about
an introduction's an introduction, whether it's official or unofficial.
I'm going to have to have we're going to have a meeting. Talk about the protocol here. So let's introduce this guy officially. He's known to the voters far and wide.
Oh, yes.
Doing a whale of a job for us.
Thank you.
I haven't found too many chinks in his armor. I'm sure there are some. Who is it we're talking about? About whom are we talking, Judy?
Well, we're talking about Tim Butler, our representative down in the big city of Springfield for this district. And my first question to you, Mr. Butler, would be, are there skeletons in your closet? Since he's raised the subject?
Since you bring it up, it is, I'm a graduate of Eastern Illinois University, and it is homecoming week at EIU this week, with actually the 100th homecoming football game at Eastern this weekend.
Oh.
So I will be making the trek over to Charleston on Saturday. I'm sure talking about any skeletons that might be in my closet from my days at EIU. So.
I'm sorry to hear, of a serious note, because of all the budgetary problems about which we're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes, that Eastern is probably the most prominent of our schools are having more financial problems, and that disturbs me. And it should disturb every taxpayer in the state of Illinois, because that's a venerable institution. It's served a lot of folks, do a good job down there, and it's my understanding that they're in serious trouble, Tim.
Eastern's been around since 1895. Mm-hmm. I was over there last week, and I had asked the university for a kind of the insider's tour to find out really what's going on and look at some of the facilities. And President Glassman, David Glassman, who's been on board for a little over 2 years now, he came from Bradley. He was the provost of Bradley and has been the president at EIU for about 2.5 years. He was gracious with his time. He spent about 3 hours cars with me. They took me around campus. I went in, had lunch in one of the dorms. I went into some of the halls, talked to the athletics folks as well. And I think they're on good footing. They do have issues. They've had issues since before the budget situation, as have a lot of our universities. We export 18,000 kids a year that go out of state to go to school, the second most in the country out of all the states. But I think Eastern's on good financial footing. Glassman's done a good job dealing with the budget situation, and it's not easy. They've lost a lot of students over the last decade, really. But what I was impressed with were some of the results that they have despite the budget challenges. They have the highest retention rate for freshmen of any of our public universities in the state of Illinois. They have the highest they have the highest four-year graduation rates out of any of the colleges that we have. We produce a lot of, and their athletics program, I think they had 70-some students in athletics last year that got a 4.0.
Wow.
So they do good.
I think we ought to repeat that. 70 students with a 4.0
who are in athletics in athletics programs.
Yes, which is very, very important.
It really is.
People talk about jocks all the time.
Yeah.
Make fun of that. And in fact, I can relate to that very personally. When I was at the University of Illinois, I was at a political science class that met Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 1 o'clock. We had 3 boys on the football team, 2 of them All-American and 1 pretty doggone good. And during the football season, I never saw them.
Oh.
I had a few of those. I remember a few of those, too.
Yeah, I heard about that.
But on a serious note, in your athletic program over there at Eastern, you have that many that have high academic records. So they're doing something right.
They've made a real emphasis, and Eastern's long been known as a teaching school. They graduate a lot of students that go in to become, especially elementary education teachers. But also they have a strong sciences program as well, kinesiology, biology, things like that. A lot of students go to Eastern and then go on to medical school, it's. I think we as a state, and this gets into the larger issues with the budget and where we're going. I think we as a state, we need to determine if we're going to make the investments especially in our public institutions. Look, the U of I is doing fine. I know they had struggles with the budget situation, but the U of I is doing good. ISU's doing
flagship
good.
It's a flagship university.
It is the flagship. It's and its history as a land grant university, and it's a wonderful institution. But places like Southern and Eastern and Western and even Northern have really struggled over the last decade, and we need to figure out as a state if we're going to make the investment in education, which we've seen really decimated from a funding perspective over the last decade and a half.
What better investment can you make in the populace than investing in the education?
So one of the things that I really started thinking about this week after I visited Eastern, we've expanded in Medicaid. Look, Medicaid's a good program and it serves a lot of vital needs, but we've expanded the Medicaid program in the state of Illinois exponentially over the last 15 years. At the same time, we have decreased funding to things like higher education. So it's the old adage: do you give somebody a fish or do you teach them how to fish? Kind of thing.
Exactly.
And if we're not investing in higher education, we're not teaching people how to fish. And at the end of the day, we're going to end up giving them benefits through the SNAP program or Medicaid and things like that if we don't allow them to go to school and become educated and go out into the workforce and become productive citizens.
Handouts just don't compare with a handout.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You talk about education. The other night on the news, there was an item about education in the public schools in Chicago and some of the programs that they had instituted up there. We don't have anything like that downstate. I mean, they've got programs to teach them how to tie their shoes. They got everything going up there. So that then comes back ultimately to budgets. And what the hey is this budget business? I want to know about this education disparity, and I want to know about this budget business. Is it all partisan?
Well, with the education funding, we passed a bill in August that revamped the education funding in the state of Illinois, and K-12 education funding in Illinois is based off basically kind of three different pots. You've got some federal money that goes into it, which is a small percentage in most schools. You've got state money, direct tax dollars that come from the state that go back to schools, and then you've got property taxes. I mean, those are the three things that go into play.
And in the end, it's all my money anyway.
It's all your money. Actually, if it's state taxes, federal taxes, or property taxes, you're paying for your schools. And so in Illinois, we've had for a long time we've had a funding formula, the state funding formula that goes back to the schools. We've had that in place for about 2 decades. And we've become what they call the most inequitable state in funding education out of all the most disparity. We're in a lot of good things that aren't good. So what we've done over the last since I've been in, this is one of the first things I started hearing about two years ago, was what's called an evidence-based funding model, where we put about 30 some different factors into the formula, including poverty rates, including local match through things like property taxes and things like that, and come up with a new formula for money that comes from the state that goes to schools, so we can level out the playing field. So the Hartsburg Emdens of the world, or the Greenviews of the world, or whoever, are on a level playing field with the New Triers of the world, and that's the big thing. We have, because of property wealth in the state of Illinois, there's a big disparity in how much funding goes to our local schools. And so from a state perspective, we're trying to even that out to make sure that all kids have the same access. But you're going to continue to see these stories, because a lot of schools, especially suburban schools, because of their property wealth, can put more money into their schools and have these great programs and stuff like that. And vice versa, in the city of Chicago, we gave Chicago a lot of control over their own school system 20 years ago, and CPS is it can be a mess, or maybe it can do good things, but they get to manage it themselves largely, and that's an area again where Chicago, from a property tax perspective, honestly has not taxed their citizens enough to pay for their schools. I mean, they've really undervalued their property in the city of Chicago. You used a strange
word there when you refer to Cook County. You used the word honest.
Yeah.
And therein lies the problem.
It's Cook County's one of the, as a Cubs fan, I have a love-hate relationship with the city. I know my friend, my colleague from the East over in Decatur, Mr. Mitchell, a few years ago introduced a bill to excommunicate Chicago.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I'm not one to advocate for that. I think we don't need to kick them out of the state. I think we just need to kick the leadership out of Chicago and get hopefully new leadership in there to move them forward. But
how about that though?
I'm not sure I'm going to live that long, Tim. Seriously.
Yeah, really.
I'm serious about that. Here,
Michael Madigan's really got a nice pink ribbon around it, I'll tell you.
He does. I was 3 years old when Mr. Madigan got elected to the Illinois House, and I just became eligible for AARP about 6 months ago. So
yeah, I see.
And he's still there.
Yeah. Well, why do you
think... My jaw keeps dropping.
Why do you think he fights term limits?
Well, that's exactly right. And
why do you think he fights freezing property taxes?
Yep.
What does his law firm specialize in?
Yep. Property tax appeals.
Okay.
You got it. You got it. Yep.
So it's whose ox is gored, right?
Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel here in this regard, as regards term limits at all? It's pretty hard for me to believe that these guys are going to vote themselves out of office, so to speak, because that's essentially what's going to happen. Now, I'm going to stroke him on the air here. He gets, because he's a legislator, he gets slammed with all the rest of the dudes down there. But when it comes to working for the district, Mr. Butler does a good job for us.
Thank you. I appreciate
that. And I'm not trying to stroke you here. The other thing I will say is that when they have special sessions, which are an absolute anathema to everybody, Mr. Butler eschews his wages for the special sessions, which is commendable. Now,
I don't think since I live 2 miles from the Capitol, I need to be getting per diem.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, that's
So
another story. These dudes,
I try very hard not to take those $111 a day since I live 2 miles.
these dudes.
And I've opted out of the pension program too.
You have
Yep.
opted out of the pension program.
Yep.
All right. There's another star in his cap. But these dudes.
You're an eleemosynary.
Yeah. Well, he certainly is a different breed of cat down there. You just get totally frustrated, Mr. Butler, when you sit down and talk with these guys, and they'll tell you one thing, and then they go out the door, and it's exactly 180 degrees opposite that they're going to go ahead and do.
It's the frustrating part becomes when I talk to some of my Democrat colleagues especially, and we can find common ground on issues, but it doesn't get filtered up through the leadership, honestly, on both sides. Mm-hmm. And, I think,
let's don't paint it with a broad. Let's put the Republicans in there, too.
I mean, I actually have, I try very hard to get to know, especially my Democrat colleagues, because I'm in the minority, and if I'm going to get something done, I'm going to need friends on the other side to be able to do stuff. So, the people that some of the people that I've come to know the best in the General Assembly are some of the most liberal members of the other side. But there's issues that we find. Look, there's a lot of issues we're not going to agree on, but there's issues that we are going to find some common ground on, and I think that's one of the important things. If we as members can work together and then take it to leadership and say, hey, we got a problem here that we're trying to solve. We think this is a good solution. You guys need to push it forward, and then they sit on it for political reasons. That's the big frustrating part.
Do you think we'll ever get beyond, in either the state or the national, federal government, this sides business, and come to the realization that actually, no matter whether you're an R or a D, you're supposed to be down there for the people?
One of the things that I've thought about introducing, and I don't know if I will or not, but I've thought about it, is making legislative offices in the state of Illinois nonpartisan, like we do with a lot of our municipal elections, which are elected on a nonpartisan basis. So you'd get elected to the General Assembly in a nonpartisan basis, not as a Republican, as a Democrat, but just as a representative. I believe Nebraska does that. They get elected on a nonpartisan basis.
Aren't they unicameral?
And they're unicameral as well, one
right.
chamber, right. And I think that's one way around it because I can guarantee you if there weren't R's or D's behind our name at the state capitol, Mike Madigan would not be speaker. I guarantee you. And I think that it would bring a different dynamic. Now, obviously, it throws a whole different set of issues up if you go to nonpartisan elections. But
yeah.
I think that's one, because of the party labels. And look, I'm a party guy. I've been doing this for a quarter century as a loyal Republican, working for a variety of people. But I think a lot of times when you put the party name behind your name, it does impact, substantially how people view you and how you view the world as well.
That's right. I'd like to ask you something that has just come out in Washington, and I don't mean to blindside you, but I'm sure you listen to the same news I do. And they're coming up with this idea that they have a bipartisan health care plan out there that would include them continuing to pay the insurance companies. Mm-hmm. What do you hear about that? That to me sounds like it's just more of the same.
Well, I think first of all, the Affordable Care Act has not done, what it set out to do when it was passed 8 years ago, and I think we do need to reevaluate the Affordable Care Act. It has been helpful in getting down the number of people who are uninsured. There's no doubt about that, but the impact that it's had on a lot of other people, especially through the rates going through the roof, is something we need to address. And so the insurance industry needs to be part of that solution as well. They can't be getting these subsidies just to be getting the subsidies without trying to tackle the larger problem on how you. It's called the Affordable Care Act. Let's make sure that healthcare is affordable. It's not just about access to healthcare, but it's making sure that somebody's rates aren't going up by 400%. in a year and things like that. And so I give my federal folks a lot of credit for trying to tackle this. It's a complex issue. It's got a lot of parts to it, and you have a lot of differences of opinion across the spectrum on it, but it's something, if we don't make changes to the Affordable Care Act, it's going to sink a lot of people, and we're going to be back into the situation where people who were able to afford health care a few years ago aren't able to afford it because of the price of it.
I assume, Tim, that you're. Excuse me. Go ahead, Judith. Go ahead.
Well,
I shut you right off. Go right ahead.
right at the knees. But then I got so excited and discombobulated I forgot where I was. You mustn't interrupt old people.
Well, let me add. At this point in time, in a few minutes, we get ready for the commercial district. Tim, are you and Darren LaHood in constant touch back and forth as regards your duties?
It's amazing what those little handheld devices can do to stay in touch with people. So Darren and I text a lot. We talk a lot. I know they've been back in Illinois. Darren LaHood and Rodney Davis both, who I actually live in Rodney Davis's district.
Yes.
And they're both very good friends of mine, and we stay in close contact with each other about a variety of issues. I was talking to Rodney yesterday about some transportation issues, and I actually talked to Darren's father, the former Congressman Ray LaHood, yesterday. He called me about an issue. So,
did you tell him hello from Bill and
I
me?
did. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
said I'm going to be out in the trailer in rural Logan County tomorrow.
Well, he set your seat many
The
times.
palatial trailer. You forgot its full title.
Palatial. Yes, you forgot to use the word palatial.
So yeah, they do a really good job of staying in contact with me, and actually, even the senators, their staffs do a good job, even though they're on the other side of the aisle. And I actually ran into Senator Durbin at the grocery store in Springfield a couple weeks ago. So
that would ruin your day. Speaking of running into, we're going to run into some commercials right now when Mr. Ash is ready. Good morning. Welcome back to Viewpoint, your program of personality, politicians, and perspective. This is Busby. Just remembered where she was, besides in the trailer here.
palatial.
Our guest this morning, palatial trailer. Thank you. Our guest this morning, as everybody hasn't heard yet, is Mr. Tim Butler, excellent representative for us here down there. I don't know how he gets along down there every day. Must be difficult shaving and washing your teeth. And
you bite your nails?
I don't bite my nails. No, I don't.
Do you suck your thumb?
I don't. Not since there's the skeletons in the closet there. Honestly, it's. Because I've been around this for a long time, I think I came into it with a different perspective than some of the folks. Yeah. I know a lot of my colleagues are frustrated, especially people that have not been involved in the political process as well. I get frustrated with the lack of progress, but you know what? I've got a great district. This is an area that I've worked in for a long time. It's wonderful people, great communities, and I have fun with it. I get to, Bill, you got on your Lincoln College shirt there this morning. They're a great operation. I get to spend a lot of time with them. I've got some great historic places in the area. It's a fun opportunity for me to go out and try to help the citizens there. It's the same district that Abraham Lincoln had when he was in the State House. So I mean, it's a great opportunity for me, and I know I'm not going to be doing it forever. Go do it for a little while, then go do something else. So I try to keep a smile on my face and move forward.
Did you remember what you had in mind?
Well,
go right ahead.
It was when we were talking about health care. When they first introduced this idea of the Affordable Care Act, I thought maybe we had some redundancies here insofar as we have a program for children in care.
Yep.
That takes care of their health. We have a program in place that takes care of health care for the poor.
Yep.
And we have other programs which I don't know the name of. And now we had this, and I thought, gee, it's kind of like throwing the dog a bone.
You hit it on the head. You have, really, three big programs that were in place before in the Children's Health insurance program, CHIP. You had Medicaid, which Medicaid is to provide health care for under a certain rate of poverty,
Right.
And then you've got Medicare, which is for senior citizens, basically. And so what we've seen, and the whole became people who were in the workforce but maybe didn't have insurance provided through their employer. That was kind of the big hole that we didn't have covered. So kind of the original idea that had been talked about for a long time is how do we incentivize these people to be able to participate in the health insurance program? But really what we've seen under the Affordable Care Act is an expansion of the Medicaid program. I mean, that's really where a lot of this money has gone into Medicaid to really expand a program that was already there. And the people, the problem that has become are the people who aren't in Medicaid, who aren't in CHIP. They're the ones that continue to see their rates go up because this hasn't held down the cost of health insurance, and now people are required to have health insurance. I mean, that's the law. You have to, the Supreme Court decided this. You're required to have health insurance. You either prove that you have health insurance or you pay the penalty for not having health insurance. And so that's allowed the people who aren't on Medicaid for their rates to get jacked up, and that's the real problem right now.
They're also talking about going after the pharmaceutical companies because there's such a disparity in drug costs. Something that's terribly expensive here might be cheap in Canada and vice versa. Now, who's that going to hurt or help?
Well, I think that the government has a huge role to play here with trying to work with the pharmaceutical industry to hold down costs. I think we don't do nearly a good enough job to leverage the governmental insurance programs that we have through Medicare and through TRICARE and some of these other Medicaid, to go to the insurance industry and say, or go to the pharmaceutical industry and say, hey, we're gonna negotiate on behalf of X millions of people for whatever drug it is to try to hold the cost down. I think that's one way we can do it. I think the other thing, the ability also to have things, like you said, like with Canada. I mean, if you can get a drug in Canada for a certain cost, we should be able to get that in the United States and be able to have the same as well. The pharmaceutical industry, I will say, they do tremendous things. They've created drugs that have helped extend lives, and their research has done great things. But I think they also need to realize that along with everybody else, those drugs need to be affordable for the folks to be able to use them.
Well, they always say that R&D is so expensive, and of course it is.
Yep.
Terribly.
And that's the usual argument that you hear from the pharma folks is about the research.
648-5510. You have an opportunity now to talk to your representative, Mr. Square Shooter. And Mr. Butler would be happy to answer any questions. He may dodge and step and move around, but he'll answer your questions.
Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time.
648-5510. A serious note to have an opportunity to ask a question of your representative. Mr. Butler, I noted that the morning paper has remarks about budget cuts. Well, whatever strange thing that is. And among the cuts would be such things as, get this here, Soil and Water Conservation District, Cooperative Extension, county fairs, many of which are struggling, and in fact we've lost some county fairs due to economics, due to the fact that the government the state of Illinois doesn't pay its bills, and it's hard for to get exhibitors. Premium money that they win in 1915 may get paid by the time 2018 or something like that. How do we address these hard issues?
Sure.
County fairs, I'm kind of an old Rockwellian, exactly. Norman Rockwell, Americana, and they are the backbone of a lot of That's a social. Well, not so much today, but in the old days, that was a social event for many people for all years.
Still is.
Yeah.
So how do we address this problem of trying to find this money for these?
First of all, the budget that was enacted over the veto of the governor, with the permanent increase in the income tax, the revenues, the spending side of it was pegged at about $36.5 billion, and the governor has consistently said since that bill was enacted that it's not a balanced budget, even with the tax increase. And so I think what you're seeing today, I didn't read the full story. I saw it in the Springfield paper this morning as well, but I didn't read the full story yet. But I think what you're seeing is this idea, what the governor has been saying, that it's not a balanced budget, now coming home to roost, because even though he did not support the budget, he now is tasked with carrying it out as the top, executive official in the state of Illinois. So he and his team need to determine how they're going to balance a budget that they don't believe is balanced. They have a constitutional requirement to carry out a balanced budget. So that it doesn't surprise me to see this, where some of these programs might see a cut in funding. Soil and water conservation districts are one, especially that I've had discussions with the governor's office about, because I think they provide vital services for the district that I represent. And I've talked to the folks from Logan County and Tazewell County, especially when it comes to the soil and water conservation districts. My hope is that I believe there was about $7 million in funding for soil and water conservation districts that was in the budget, and I think they're looking at which was beyond the funding that they had received in the previous last time we had a full budget enacted. So I think what the governor's office might be doing is trying to look at just the base funding that they had 2 years ago, which was, I think, at a $5 million level. But this is what's going to happen. I mean, unfortunately, this is what's going to happen. They're going to have to manage the budget, and you're going to see cuts to programs to try to get to a balanced budget. And there's only so many places you can cut, because of a lot of our programs, just like on the federal level, are so-called entitlement programs. There's monies you can't cut in places like Medicaid. I mean, there's transportation funding that you may be able to cut, but you can't cut some of it because you're going to lose your federal match to it as well. So that's why it gets disproportionately impacted on things that come directly out of the general revenues, like the county fair funds, like the soil and water conservation districts, things like that. It gets disproportionately impacted, I think, into districts like mine that benefit more from those programs than some other districts.
But that general fund is a big basket, because money that, for instance, several years ago, when you were just a little boy, they had an idea about the lottery, and that was going to go for education, and it all went into the general fund. But we rationalized that by saying
Never to be seen again.
that the general fund pays for education, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a shell. That was a shell game.
Yeah, it was
It's
a shell game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
So we do that kind of thing, and then we call it the general fund. What the heck?
So we have about half of the spending in the state of Illinois comes out of the general fund, or general revenue fund, GRF. So that's that $36.5 billion figure. We've got another $35 to $37 billion that goes into what are called other state funds. So those are dedicated revenue streams. So like the road fund. So when I filled up my gas at $2.39 on the north end of Springfield this morning, I'm paying that 19 cents a gallon that's going into the road fund to pay for construction. That gets set aside into the road fund. So we have almost 700 funds in the state of Illinois that are dedicated funds that pay for a particular purpose. So between the two, the overall budget that we have in the state of Illinois is actually about $70 billion. But the ones that we have really control over are the general revenue funds, and we put a disproportionate impact, like I was saying earlier, in the general revenue fund. So when we're paying out to the county fairs and when we're paying out to soil and water conservation districts, they don't have a dedicated funding like the road fund does. So that fund is coming out of the general fund, as is Medicaid, as is pension payments, as is higher education. All that stuff comes out of the general fund, which has a lot more pressures on it than the other funds that are dedicated ones. And so that's one of the reasons why we've been put in this situation, is because we have so much pressure on the general revenue funds, and we continue to have costs go up in some of the, especially in some of the social service programs that have really, we've had to make cuts in other areas because those programs have gone up.
Mm-hmm. The welfare fund. I know it's hard-hearted and all that, but we need a surgeon's knife to the welfare fund. I'm speaking particularly now of professional mothers and others of that ilk, people who will make babies because they're going to get money from the state and the federal government. That's just an abomination.
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about what our priorities are with higher education, and do you want to teach someone how to get into the workforce and have a productive life and all that kind of stuff versus, we're going to take care of people one way or the other. You're going to take care of them through providing an education and trying to get them on their 2 feet, or are you going to take care of them through providing welfare benefits and medical benefits for them and things like that? And I think we as a state need to decide what our priorities are. Under President Clinton, when welfare reform was enacted in 1996, on the federal level, which went down to the states, they had work requirements that went along with under welfare reform.
Yeah, right.
Those got peeled back under President Obama. Mm-hmm. So you don't have the same work requirements that we had 20 years ago. And I think that's a huge part of this. We need to have work requirements for people who are who are going to get benefits from the state. I got federal loans to help with my schooling. Mm-hmm. I had to pay those loans back.
Sure.
And if I wouldn't have paid those loans back,
what a strange. And
if I wouldn't have paid those loans back, I would have had action taken against me.
Yeah, and they'd have repoed your diploma.
Right, exactly. I've got it at the office, so I know I have it. I can produce it.
But it just seems so inequitable to hand out this money to those the entitlement folks, and they're out there. They abound. I don't think anybody had any objection to helping somebody who true need. Those who are leeches ought to have to be made to do some work for whatever. If they go to the hospital and help them do something.
Yeah.
Was there not a talk at one point about people who are receiving help from some of these programs having to pass a drug drop?
Well, that often gets brought up. I think I'm trying to remember. That might be another Bill Mitchell one that got introduced in the State House, and that's something that gets brought up discussed on a regular basis. I personally think in the state of Illinois you're not going to see it because I don't think a lot of my colleagues from Chicago would go along with it. So I don't think it's something that you're going to see in the state of Illinois personally.
Well, pardon my ignorance, please, but why would they not go along with that?
Oh, I'm not quite sure.
It's called voting.
Oh, that.
I don't know if they think it would be discriminatory or something along those lines. But when that gets brought up, and of course then the common question then becomes, well, if you're going to do that, maybe all the politicians should be drug tested too, and I'd be all right. That's
yeah.
You want to do that?
By the way,
sure.
that's not a bad idea. I think the way some of these dudes act down there.
Yeah.
I volunteer at the prison out here, and I had to pass a drug drop.
Yeah.
I said, "You got to be kidding! I'm a grandmother."
Yeah.
Well, that didn't matter to them.
A lot of employees,
And I didn't think about
a lot of private company employees. When I worked at St. John's Hospital, it's one of the first things I had to do was go pee in a cup. So
Yep.
that's what you got to do.
That's a sad commentary, but that's what we've come to now in this country. It used to be where her daughter works. We had what was called the personnel department. Now it's called the human services. A rose is a rose. If you can paint any color, but, it's
Some places
so
call it the people
complicated.
department.
It's just got and one's genders, one's sexual orientation. We've just gone so far afield. It's ridiculous.
Well, that's So we had a bill this year that was the transgender birth certificate bill, which said that you can go back and change your if you're gender identity has changed, that you can go back and change your birth certificate based off not even having surgery, but if your doctor says you can. And, my point on that was you're born, it's your birth certificate. You're born one way or the other.
Yeah.
God ordained it something,
Exactly. And that was one that I opposed. But I had people come, and that's where I always try to keep an open mind. I had people come to my office. I have friends whose kids were transgender, and they came in and sat down with me, and I understand where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, your birth certificate's your birth certificate, and that's
the day you were born. This is who you were.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. I got one question before that doggone clock runs out again.
It almost did.
The railroad. There's a sign uptown that says "Prepare to stop for the 80-mile-an-hour."
85.
I'm sorry.
85.
Oh well, I was going
There's a sign right here outside the palatial the trailer too.
Yeah, right. Well, they've done a lot of work on that, including miles upon miles of wonderfully lovely wrought iron fencing. Really handsome. Is it going to go 80 miles an hour, and is it really going to save 10 minutes?
Well,
for the
so
person coming
the
from
initial
St. Louis?
once this is done, the high-speed train section is done, which I think they're pretty close to finishing most of it. I'm not sure exactly. In a lot of sections between St. Louis and Chicago, the trains will be able to go 110 miles an hour. That's the idea. You get them up to 110 miles an hour. And it'll save, I forget,
So what, 20 minutes or so?
20 minutes, 25 minutes,
Between
half
Chicago
hour,
and St. Louis?
something like that, yeah. So, this was a program under the, President Obama, and our state decided to go for it, to increase, the train speeds between St. Louis and Chicago. I ride that train fairly frequently when I go to Chicago, and I appreciate the service that it provides.
Yes.
As long as we don't get sidetracked because of the freight that has to come down the
that's
come
another
down
thing.
the track. That puts a damper on your 110 miles an hour when you got to sit on the
it
side.
cuts your 20 minutes way
So
down.
Amtrak provides a really good service for the state of Illinois. I don't know honestly if the investment we've made in the high-speed rail has. Could we have used that money for something else? But it was the feds made the decision to do it. I know they've got I just saw a couple of new engines that are out that'll bring those cars up to 110 or whatever. But yeah, don't stand in the way of the 85-mile-an-hour train. So
Well, no, I wouldn't want to go to battle with it.
Jim, we appreciate the fact you've taken some time out of your busy schedule and made the trip up from Springfield to visit with Judy and I this morning. We try to get Tim here periodically to inform the voters, both of them out there that are listening to us.
your 8 loyal listeners.
But we do appreciate you taking your time. We always try to close with a comment or two. I found this old Winnie Churchill.
Oh, bless his heart.
Good old Winston Churchill, one of the great people in history. And this is pretty profound. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
Oh.
Thank you for Viewpoint. That about